a 10-month review of the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro, which I bought 10 months ago. I want to go into sport, health and sleep. Now health is part of, or rather sleep is part of health, so therefore let's start with sleep. Now, sleep tracking. I already had it before on my Galaxy Active 2 and then the Galaxy Watch 4. Now, I have to say that the sleep tracking is often off. I think this is mostly due to the problem that I often sleep on my stomach. If I sleep on my stomach, then I sleep on my wrists. The same is true also for the Galaxy Watch 4, even though the Galaxy Watch 4 then often gets sleep to basically a larger portion compared to the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro. Compared to the 6S Pro, which I had before, it seems to track more sleep, but still there is basically a lack of sleep, which is maybe 2/7 of the sleep I actually get in a given week. Now this could be the case that one day is entirely missing. This could be the case that 2 days of the week are entirely missing. This could also be the case that it only tracks like 60 to 70 to 80% of the sleep I actually had. And I also have, according to the Galaxy Watch, even though the Galaxy Watch often then also does not get this. Then what Garmin gives you is a couple of different metrics. Now these metrics might even be more compared to my Galaxy Watch 4, because the Galaxy Watch 4 is an older model, whereas the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro, until the 8 came out, was the newest model of the Garmin lineup and also the best model of the Garmin lineup one could get. So, you get a sleep score. The sleep score is from 0 to 100. I often get sleep scores of maybe 80, 70, but 2 days ago, for example, because it did not catch the sleep, I did not get a very high sleep score. So therefore, there's a problem, which is that my sleep quality does not necessarily correlate with the sleep score. Now, Galaxy, on the other hand, the Galaxy Watch, on the other hand, seems to kind of interpret the data it has to maybe, basically it interprets the data more positively. So I obviously have the same quality sleep, but these two different trackers might interpret these the sleep they tracked slightly differently, and Garmin seems to be more conservative, more like on the this is bad side, whereas the Galaxy Watch seems to be on the side where it gives me a couple of more sleep points also from a score from 0 to 100. I can then take a look at the average sleep score, but not on Garmin, because the Garmin device does not give me an average sleep score. I can only take a look at Garmin Connect, and I think it shows me the sleep score for the last several weeks or something like this, but then it only shows me high or low for something like the year, which I found not that useful. I try to take a look at the yearly averages for many different values, such as resting heart rate. For example, right now my resting heart rate measured by this device is 48 for the last rolling year, and I can also take a look at this on my Galaxy Watch. Now, I found this to be more useful because then I can see how I compare to the version of me that just lived the last year. And this, I think, is something that is somewhat useful if I at least keep other variables stable, such as I don't try to bulk, I don't try to cut down, which then also makes things like the body composition somewhat useful, I would say. Or I can then take a look at body fat percentage as measured on 2 additional devices. So I have 2 additional devices by Garmin, which are the Index S2, which is their body fat scale, and I also have the Garmin Index BPM, which is the blood pressure monitor, which already kind of gives a clue into the idea that I went into Garmin as kind of the most capable health system or health tracking system I could get at this point in time, at least the one with a continuous measurement. Now, sleep also it also has another area. So, first of all, there's night sleep. The night sleep results in a sleep score. The same is true also for the smartwatch, for the Galaxy Watch. The night sleep results in a sleep score. So the duration, and then there are different metrics which you can look up, or different criteria which one can look up in the help section. And then, according to this, you get a sleep score. There is also a nap feature, and this nap feature began to core maybe a couple of months ago. I then decided to try this, and there are 2 different things one can do with the nap tracking feature. The first one is that one can track manually naps. Now these naps do not have to mean then that one is asleep. So one could just lie down for 10 minutes. One could also track a nap for 2 hours. It doesn't really matter. It also doesn't really matter in terms of the sleep score, because the naps are tracked differently. The naps then result maybe in a body battery increase, but only if the nap was actually restorative. But if you just manually tracked it and actually you went to the grocery store, then it probably also does not increase your body battery. So there is an impact, and I think it is also fairly useful to hold these 2 things differently or separately. Samsung, on the other hand, sometimes if the nap exceeds a certain threshold, if it's like, let's say 2 hours, then it also counts this towards the daily sleep, whereas the sleep score again is only calculated from the night sleep, from the And note, if you have additional day sleep, let's just call it day sleep, then the additional sleep is not counted towards the sleep score. The sleep score is only calculated from basically the main phase of the day in which you are sleeping. Which also means if there is only one phase of the day in which you only sleep 2 hours, then it might also mean on both devices that you get a sleep score which then is fairly low. Now, in terms of sleep tracking in total, I think as of currently it is somewhat useful. I also try to use my sleep scores as a proxy in order to get better quality sleep, which to a certain extent seems to have worked. And I now would say I have some of the best sleep I ever had, at least in the last year, let's say. And my sleep score, for example, on this device has been steadily increasing over the last couple of years, but on this device I don't know, because Garmin does not give me an average sleep score readout for the last year. That's unfortunate. Now let's go to a few different health metrics already, which also then are derived maybe from sleep metrics. HRV. One of the big reasons I wanted to have a Garmin watch was to have a watch that actually measured HRV. So when I took a look at this, there were basically 3 different variants of me getting some HRV measurement. The first one was that I would install an app called Welltory on the Galaxy Watch 4 I had, which works, but it's only a one-time measurement. Similarly to heart rate, a one-time measurement does not give you much of all, unless you standardize the measurement. Similarly to blood pressure, which you ideally have in a very rested state, then call it resting blood pressure, and resting heart rate, which is already resting heart rate. If you take not resting heart rate, but you just randomly sample heart rate, then it probably is not a very useful measurement. Now, the Garmin has HRV. It calculates then the overnight HRV, or much rather the overnight average, and with the overnight average one can then compare basically the nights, and this is then fairly useful. Also during the day, I think sometimes measures HRV, but in order to measure HRV you need to be still, and it needs to measure it maybe for 2 minutes. There is also a function that allows you to, during the day, measure your HRV, and it then takes 2 minutes, and then it says, okay, your HRV is like these many milliseconds. There are also different ways to measure HRV, or rather different units of measuring HRV. I'm not exactly sure which one it uses, but I think it is probably somewhat standardized. So now I have HRV, I have it on a watch. Now, in addition to having these health metrics, I also wanted a watch that actually had sports features. And now health and sport begin to become intertwined, I think, and mostly because one can think maybe of sport as the thing that is targeted towards optimizing health, basically physical activity that is targeted towards optimizing health to a certain extent. Because it's not particularly just for endurance, it's not particularly for just strength, it's, I think, just in general health. So if I do activity, and the activity is targeted towards health, then there are basically 2 buckets of activity. The first one is the one that occurs throughout the day, which Samsung now sometimes automatically tracks, and it then creates an activity for you, but Garmin does no such thing. So Garmin has this thing called Garmin IQ, which also kind of during the day tracks, but it then doesn't display it as activity. So it's not a recorded activity such as a run that took this long and it was 40 minutes and it had this pace. Now, I think this approach is actually more useful because I then can decide, basically, am I doing something where I'm basically putting additional effort into this, or is it part of the rest of my day? If it is part of the rest of my day, I also don't necessarily want these automatically tracked activities in my activity data popping up, because then they just confuse me, and this is just then too much data, I think, for me. So I actually kind of prefer the system on the Garmin where I can just start an activity and then the activity occurs. And if I don't start an activity, then these activities also I don't see them, because these are just, okay, these are steps, these are tracked somewhere else. I don't need to have an activity for 10 minutes of grocery store walking. And this also then brings up the issue, which I had on the Galaxy Watch a couple of times. If I then walk, let's say, for 40 minutes, and it actually would count maybe towards my overall kilometers that I walked on the watch, do I then start actually a GPS tracking also? So the Galaxy Watch, for example, sometimes then asks you, okay, do you now want to start GPS tracking? And this is just too much for me. I just want to go out, and if I am on a walk and I'm on a phone call and I happen to walk like 20 minutes more, then I don't want to start an activity or something like this. I mean, it would be nice if these kilometers would be tracked, but I cannot track them, because then I have to constantly decide how much I want to walk, and I have to predict how much I want to walk, and this seems to be not really working. Now, in terms of the watch itself, the watch I have is also the Solar Watch, which offers an additional feature, which is the solar intensity. So the solar intensity is now just a value that says how much light this solar ring got. Now, because it seems to be somewhat useful to track how much light my eyes or my body's skin get, I took a look at the solar intensity and discovered kind of that this was a way to track my light exposure. And so I have it on my wrist, and also in winter I kind of make sure to not cover up my wrist and therefore the light sensor. Of course, this is now only an approximation. It's not the light sensor but the solar panel rather. So this is now somewhat of an approximation how much light my skin gets, but then I can take a look at this and see, okay, on this day I did a run and then I had this many lux hours, and then I can compare this, and currently this metric is not available on the phone. It is somewhat available, but only kind of the last couple of days. It would be nice if I would see this as a metric on my Garmin, on the Garmin Connect app, such that I could take or derive something from this. In winter, I have this many lux hours on week on average. It shows you a weekly average, currently also on a smartwatch, but it's ever rolling and it is stored nowhere, it seems. I hope at least it is stored in the Garmin server and then is made available once Garmin figures out how to basically take this value and to approximate basically overall light exposure, maybe also eye exposure, but of course it's difficult if you wear sunglasses or a hat, or you just have this watch out somewhere, or you let it. If it is on you, then it is measuring the light it hits, but if you have it covered, then probably not. So you would have to find many different ways in which to cover all these different scenarios, where it maybe also registers that you have now something over it, so it could maybe register that half of it is covered, or also take basically light intensity from a database into account and then measure this against what you are doing, and also if you are walking, if you're probably outside due to the temperature, which it also measures. So now, sport tracking. Sport tracking was becoming easier after I switched to this watch. Sport tracking also became more professional. I am kind of, to a certain extent at least, maybe also somewhat jokingly, referring to myself as a kind of athlete. Now, obviously I'm not really an athlete, I'm just doing this somewhat recreationally, because a professional is someone who earns his money with this. I am not. So therefore, but the thing is this, and this is also some of the frame I wanted to apply at least. These are the devices that athletes all around the world wear. And I now have one of these. So this is the best technology, basically, currently. Now, one could also, so the coming back to the three different options I would have in terms of measuring HRV, the first one that would have made sense. So I did not want an Apple Watch. I don't know, at this point in time also did not know whether Apple Watches could track HRV or something like this. But, well, I could take Welterry on this watch. I could buy a Whoop, which I already ordered, and then I cancel again. Or I could take a look at a Garmin watch. Now, the problem now was that if I switched to the Garmin watch, then I would have two watches. Wouldn't this be ridiculous? Yes, it is, and now for about 1.5 years I've worn two watches. Why? Because I don't want to discontinue the step tracking and so on and so forth and also the resting heart rate from this device. So basically from the Samsung ecosystem. Also, I now have basically redundant data or overlapping data. I can take a look at, okay, this Garmin watch measured a 32 in terms of my sleep score, but this measured an 82. So probably maybe it's in the middle, but of course now I have additional data points, which means probably this watch just did not get any sleep at all, or the sensor was not properly in the right position on my wrist, and so on and so forth. So I can basically derive additional value from having two watches and also comparing these two. Now, how do I track activities? I track them here, then I use an app called HealthSync, which synchronizes the activity data that is created in Garmin and then synchronized to Garmin Connect with the Samsung Galaxy ecosystem. What this allows me to do is to have my activities in both. Nonetheless, of course, there are many metrics that are not synchronized, such as, okay, advanced running metrics on this watch, which don't translate well through this app at least. So what you have on the Galaxy ecosystem, if you have a synchronized Garmin activity, is the pace as well as the route. So basically the GPS track is synchronized and then Samsung interprets it accordingly. Now, what else is there to say? Many different things actually. So first of all, I now have a VO2 max estimate. I also would have on this, but on the Samsung, I did not have a metric. Now I do have a metric which is displayed on the watch itself. Now, in order to kind of go through the different uses or the different health metrics it offers, I would just go through the different widgets I have set up. So on the watch itself, I do have a calendar widget set up, or a calendar glance that is set up. I then have notifications which display selected apps. So only a couple of apps are displaying notifications on this watch, which one, so this can be set also. Then I have training status. Training status is one of the most useful things I would say about this watch. It basically tells me, mostly cardiovascularly speaking, how my training status is. Am I progressing? Am I regressing? Am I strained? And so on and so forth. And now if you click on training status, you can see that currently, for example, my VO2 max is increasing, which is nice. My HRV is low. My acute load is optimal. Load, for example, is something there are so many metrics in Garmin that through now these 1.5 years, I basically had phases in which I took a closer look at some of them, and then try to see, okay, how does this correlate with the food I eat, with the activity I'm doing, whether I'm doing sauna, or whether I'm on a run, or whether I'm doing this. Recently, for example, I kind of, for the first time, really saw what stress actually is. And what stress actually seems to be is kind of just how much demand there is on my body at a certain amount, at a certain point. This could be that for the last 4 hours. So, for example, the question of how hard did I actually work during a given year is, to a certain extent, maybe replaceable with the question, how much did I use my body for a given year? Of course, then regeneration also plays a role, but that this again becomes a problem if regeneration is so good that it lowers the average stress, but if I want to answer the question of how hard have I worked, then I could at least use the proxy of how my average stress during a given year was during my awake time, and to a certain extent Garmin answers this question for me. And there are many other questions like this, which I now can take a look at a Garmin metric and say, okay, this is a rough approximation. For example, how alert or how tired am I during a given day, or how much of my intelligence, of my computation am I using throughout a given day. And then I have Garmin Body Battery, which largely indicates basically my energy level throughout the day. Then I can also see by what it is impacted. I can also see if I take a nap, sometimes I take a nap and then after 20 minutes I wake up and then my body battery has increased by 2 points. Sometimes my body battery doesn't matter at all because for the last 2 nights the Garmin watch didn't get any sleep. Nonetheless, this is better than nothing, and I'd rather take this data compared to no data. There are also many different aspects or many different things that are kind of sub-things. In the training status, for example, you can also see this. This is the load focus, and it shows you how much of the different parts of activity you did. So the first one is anaerobic, then we have high aerobic, and then we have kind of the baseline. What you can see here is that I do too much kind of more recreational activity, which could be zone 2, zone 1, zone 3 running, but I'm not doing enough of zone 4 or zone 5 running. I think at least the orange one is zone 4 or zone 5 exclusively. But I am doing apparently my sprint training, which I do on a Tuesday, but in addition I do sometimes running training, running, sprinting training, interval training, and I do 1 minute of assault bike after every workout I do at the gym. So this seems to be at least sufficient to supply, at least in terms of the proportion of the overall load, it seems to be sufficient, at least in terms of the individual now absolute values compared to basically the load that might be changing. I can also see whether my load is optimal. For example, and this now basically means that, so if I'm in the green zone, what this means is that I'm doing so much that my body still can handle it. If my load ratio, for example, is too high, this means that the load I currently am running, not running in terms of running, but in terms of how much load I'm basically accumulating, then if one compares this value to the, I think, last 4 weeks, then if this value is 1.5 or up to 1.5, then it's in the optimal zone. So I can also take a look at the load ratio. And now what this gives me is basically the load I ran in the last weeks. Basically means how much did I in the last weeks cardiovascularly speaking. And now if I'm slightly better than this, then this means that I'm probably slightly improving. So basically one could see this as the derivative, and if the derivative is 1.5, then it's probably still okay. And sometimes there have been incidences in which I, for example, did an additional session of sauna, and I tried to push myself in the sauna, so I basically went out only when I barely could bear it, and then I did an additional cold shower, and then basically I was over. what was over then meant was that I was sick for 3 days, and to a certain extent, at least from the training status, this was obvious because I was above a load ratio of 1.5. Now there have been many instances in which this wasn't true, and also many instances in which, for example, Garmin just didn't track properly my sleep, which is kind of this is actually kind of the biggest data hole in the system, that Garmin does not catch my sleep properly. And I mean, if I just sleep on my stomach and this, or if I just turn over while I'm unconscious sleeping, then I can just really not do much about this. Maybe in the future this improves. I hope it improves. And so, well, so much about this. Now let's take a look at VO2 max. VO2 max is kind of the best approximation to how well one is cardiovascularly doing. And the higher the VO2 max, which is measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute, which is the oxygen uptake. So if I have a VO2 max of 59, let's just say, then I can, per kilogram of my body weight, per minute, I can take up 59 milliliters of oxygen, which is a number. Now this number seems to be if in any study one takes into account cardiorespiratory fitness, at least in many of the papers I read the first 3 sentences of, then cardiorespiratory fitness often is kind of used, or the VO2 max is often used as the best proxy for cardiovascular fitness. And so having an estimate of this cardiovascular fitness, which can be measured either by running outside for a certain amount of time, and also you need to be, I think, at 70% heart rate, then gives you a number. And this number, in this case, in my case, is 59 as of today. And I also was able to, at least once I got a Garmin watch, I was able to increase, because I was able to look through the lens of all the different things I did, through the lens of VO2 max. And so now my VO2 max, compared to getting the 6S Pro 1.5 years ago, is not 52 or 53, but it is now 59, and that's nice. So VO2 max now is also showing you, or this VO2 max is also showing you this graph, which shows your VO2 max over time, and it also shows you then a couple of other things, but this particular glance, so these all things are called glances, which I already mentioned, and this is only showing you basically the VO2 max trend, which is also then shown on the Garmin Connect app, which I might dive into a little bit more. Then I also have the HRV status in the initial things I have in here. So this is not the initial things I have in here, but this is all just training status still. HRV status now also shows, and the HRV status can only be seen for the last couple of, in this case, you only see the most recent week on the watch, and then you need to access basically Garmin Connect web in order to see HRV for basically the 6 months or maybe 1 month. Not 1 month, but 1 year is the interval. We also then have recovery, and so sometimes I, for example, went through a phase of taking a look at recovery. And during my interval workouts at the gym, and then additionally stacking on top sauna, I just, instead of taking a look at acute load, I just try to see how high can I get this number. And I think the highest I ever got it to was like 72 hours or something like this. So it would have taken my body 3 days to recover from all the workouts I did. Now, there is also the endurance score, and the endurance score is actually the second metric I have. Why? Because I think it's even more useful, at least as of currently, compared to the VO2 max estimate. So the VO2 max estimate is nice, but because I only run once in a week, and if I don't hit the 70% of heart rate max, then I don't get actually an update, or sometimes I do get an update, but I'm not entirely sure, and sometimes it just stops. So I think you need to meet all of these criteria, which I think is on a flat surface, run for maybe, I think now it's not even a flat surface anymore, they updated this. So I think you need to run at least 10 or 20 minutes at 70% heart rate. And if I don't hit this, then I don't get a VO2 max estimate. The endurance score nonetheless, or on the other side, takes into account basically all the activity that is cardiovascularly impacting. And so this then also updates basically after every workout. It also is higher in the morning, it seems. So if I had a regenerative or a restorative night of sleep, then it also increases my endurance score, which kind of would make sense. It is just kind of how powerful my heart is at this given moment, but also taking into account how powerful it is, kind of relatively speaking, compared to maybe 1 year ago. So you can take a look at the endurance score also 1 year ago, and we might also take a look later in kind of Garmin Connect, which is then the app. And this app also is available as a web site, which is fairly useful because in Samsung, for example, you don't have something like this. And having the thing basically on my notebook is something that I think is very useful, because sometimes go through phases in which I try to not use my phone at all, or as minimal as possible, and then having nonetheless access to this, and also being able to write workout notes, which I sometimes do, on the workouts I did, is also way more useful with a external keyboard. Then we can take a look at heart rate. It shows you basically the last couple of things you have, not the last couple of things you have. It shows you your 7-day resting heart rate, which I also have displayed on the glance I showed you earlier. And then you also can see the last 4 hours, which I sometimes take a look at in order to see during the day whether I had a resting heart rate of maybe, let's say, 37 or something like this. Now, then there's HRV status again. I have it again in here. Of course, this is not how the watch is set up, but how I have it set up. I also have floors climbed, which also seems to work somewhat well. I actually need to move out of the picture because otherwise it focuses on my eyes all the time. Then we also have steps. There is also an intelligent step count feature, which I have activated. I activated it a couple of weeks ago, and I deviated from the otherwise somewhat reasonable rule of 10,000 steps a day in order to see, first of all, what this did, and then whether I should switch back. But I still have it activated in order to use kind of this idea of what if an algorithm, this idea proposed by Brian Johnson, what if an algorithm could take better care of my health that I do? And by basically tapping into different calculations like these or interpretations like these, I take into account knowledge that is already kind of stored in these programs, and I don't have to make up these things on my own. By basically this VO2 max score, you can see, I don't have to constantly look up tables which would interpret my current VO2 max so I can see this, and I can see that I'm almost maxed out in basically the largest category, or the best category. Not almost maxed out, but I'm on the upper end of the best category. So by just seeing this, I can basically this basically implies my age range, maybe also probably my gender, not my gender, but my sex. And so I basically can take a look at this, I can make use of these systems, and I save all of the computation I otherwise, or let's just say all of the work I would otherwise have to do in order to just get a rough interpretation of a video like this. The same would be true for going through the data sets of, okay, this is the GPS track or GPX track, and so now I try to see what my VO2 max estimate is based on this formula I found on the internet, and I also have this calculator on the internet. Instead, I just have it on my wrist. It is continuously updated whenever I run, so I don't have to do anything but start the activity, which I think is fairly useful. Body battery. In the last couple of months, went through a phase in which instead of taking a look at the sleep score, I just took a look at whether my body battery was sufficiently filled after I woke up. And so I tried to basically, to answer the question, or part of using body battery was trying to answer the question of, I use body battery in order to find potentially an answer to the question whether I should go to sleep again if I woke up during the night, or maybe already towards the morning, and whether this was useful. If my body battery at 3 in the morning is already 100%, then I might as well go up, because probably I am very unlikely to fall asleep again. Stress is just this overall big thing, which one could call demand on the body. I began to think of this as this. And so if I, right now, am making a video and I don't have the watch on, then it is not measuring much. It is blocking stress usually if the activity is detected or you manually record an activity, and thus it is not giving you much of an interest, but what this means is, I think it is basically measuring only awake stress, which one can also then use, but I'm not entirely sure about this. I recently looked it up, but forgot it again. Then we have also solar intensity, which is the thing I am using in order to see how much light my eyes, or I use it as a proxy for how much light my skin and my eyes are getting. But of course my skin is often covered up, so I think it's my eyes, but now I again also begin to wear a cap outside, mostly because I have slightly longer hair, and this seems to be easier. If I just drive somewhere with the bicycle, I don't want to have my hair like flapping around. You also have weather. You also can install a couple of things like Garmin. There is the Garmin IQ store, and some people make apps. So for example, I have counters on this, which I use for tracking some things. I also now have an additional folder in here, in which I then have a couple of other things as well. Let's just go through these and see if there is any data that I don't want to show. No. So sometimes there is the race coming up, and the race is then location based. So these are the different glances I have additionally in here, which I still think that are useful, but I don't take a look at them every single day. For example, training readiness. I think it is very useful if the training readiness is 100. Recently, for example, it showed me a training readiness that was close to 100, and I then went on a run, and it was an above average run, but nonetheless it was still too slow, because maybe also of the outside conditions. It had like 33 degrees outside, so it was not a record attempt this time, but nonetheless it showed me basically that my body at least was above average in terms of its readiness. Now, if it is above average, it probably also means that it probably got the sleep data. So one could make the argument, if the data tracking is somewhat faulty, that the positive values it shows, that these are probably to take more into account than the negative values, because the negative values in this case often could be interpreted as just data missing, because it, well, didn't track my sleep that night and it shows a body battery of 3. It doesn't show a body battery of 3 because the minimum value it goes down is 5, and then it just stays at 5, which is somewhat weird, but it also probably accounts for otherwise occurring errors of not measurement, but of display, let's just say. Now, sleep score is also somewhat useful, and the other things are also somewhat useful. I no longer use the nap tracking feature. So what the nap tracking feature gives you is the ability to manually track apps. The nap tracking feature also tracks sleep during the day and interprets it just as naps. If I think it doesn't exist. So I think Garmin never adds additional sleep as sleep. On Samsung does add additional sleep on the total sleep duration of the given day, and it also sometimes just records them as naps if there are 10 to 20 minutes or something like this. Garmin, on the other hand, counts them as naps and only counts the main sleep. Now, you can also manually only counts the main sleep as well, the sleep that also determines the sleep score. And the naps, so basically you can manually track apps, but you can apps. You can manually track apps, but you can also automatically track apps. Naps. The naps are automatically tracked either way, but you also have the opportunity to manually track naps, which could also mean that you are not asleep, as I already mentioned. And then one could also take this feature, or use this feature, in order to just basically track the total duration of scheduled naps. Because if one takes a nap, one is not necessarily asleep, which is kind of a contradiction if one wants to also then track the total duration, if the watch is only able to track the naps properly if you actually are asleep. So one could use this as to track, or for tracking manual naps, basically the total duration of all the naps. Then there is the hill score, which I took a look at, but because the terrain around me is mostly flat, I often have a very bad hill score. It actually went up quite a bit when I was hiking, a little bit. It went up to 42 or something like this, still terribly bad. Nonetheless, also useful, I think. It would be more useful though if I would also be able to train for it. I nonetheless, through the hill score, for example today, I just ran 6 times at the end of the run upwards, so basically up on the stairs, which are close to a bridge I live close to. You then also have different things, like different glances that show you how much you ran, how much you cycled, how much you swam in a given week. You also have temperature, which I used also a fair bit. There is also now a feature which allows you to approximate core temperature during activity tracking, and this is another thing one can download from the Garmin IQ store, which I have downloaded, which I now can use to see my estimated core temperature based on the skin temperature this watch also can measure. And the skin temperature is also a part so the skin metric is also a part of sleep. Now, in the sleep glance, it only shows you the deviation from baseline. Pulse ox is something that is also useful, but I rarely take a look at. The calories can be synchronized only from MyFitnessPal. I do luckily track also calories, at least when I track calories, I track them with MyFitnessPal, but nonetheless I would have to be pretty consistent, which I'm not, to have the calories properly calculated. It also shows you activity calories as well as other calories, which you burn just by being alive, I guess. Then there is also the sleep coaching feature, which I rarely take a look at, mostly because it only shows you, basically it only shows you whether you need more sleep or less sleep, and then basically in intervals of 10 minutes. So the total the total range of the sleep coach recommendations are 7 hours to 9 hours. It always recommends the same thing, which does not necessarily mean it's a bad algorithm. It could actually be a simple rule that just happens to be a very good rule. Now, I just rarely take a look at it because I currently at least try to go to sleep whenever of course there are multiple different constraints on sleep, but currently have been experimenting with trying to wake up naturally, and so my body's algorithm determining when I should wake up is probably better than my sleep coach, and then I would try. It would be useful if one could set an alarm based on this. So the sleep coach recommends this, and then the sleep coach also recognizes when you fall asleep and then wakes you up, ideally also in a phase in which you are more likely. So if there are these ultradian phases throughout the night, then it would wake you maybe up in a phase in which you are not groggy afterwards, but in a phase in which you are alert afterwards. This would be useful as basically a sleep coach and awakening feature. There is an app called Sleep Cycle, I think, which does something like this, but I rarely use it, and it's also not on the Garmin watch. There is also respiration, which also is very useful. And respiration, I think I heard recently Andy Galpin talk about respiration quite a bit, that it is also a metric that is fairly useful. Now we will take a look at the Garmin Connect app, which in my case is on Android on a Galaxy S10. The app is slightly customizable. This is the main page. On top of this would be the activities, but these activities show my location, so I don't show you these. You then have, as of the update that happened a couple of months ago, the different glances which you can customize in terms of order, but also which are showing. You can also customize the categories which you see down here, and I have them set to home, activities, calendar, workouts. I recently began basically scheduling my workouts, which why would this be useful? So if you go onto an activity on the watch, let's just say I want to go for a run, then if I go on the run, then in terms of running, there is only one activity. But an activity can also have workouts. In terms of strength training, for example, I have now my workouts, basically all the workouts I do on rotation, I have them as plans. So if there is a plan, these are basically scheduled workouts, not scheduled workouts, but plans for the workouts execution. Then one could have multiple plans, and if one then schedules the workouts, one can have the plan that is set for the day. For example, when I pressed on run today, it showed me the plan for the run I made. One could also set heart rate zones, for example. One could say, or also pace goals. In this case, today I only had the goal of hitting 5 kilometers, which is kind of the minimum goal I try to hit for the run. And so if one then goes on an activity, if I go to the gym, but on some days I do another workout compared to another day, then this allows me to not have to select in the gym, which makes the process more efficient. It also kind of allows me to kind of I put skin in the game kind of already for my future because I have my workouts already scheduled. So this is what it looks like, and then so this is what it looks like if it is filled also with other things. But then if one goes into the future, one sees one error bar basically ideally on each day, but it seems to be the case that tomorrow basically I have not scheduled my strength training yet. So it allows you to kind of have a plan. One could also synchronize this to Google Calendar, but currently I have not displayed it in my normal Google Calendar view, mostly because I just, I could use it, but I don't currently. One has also the ability to create multiple different workouts. So one can copy basically a workout and kind of create one's own workout. It is still then showing up as kind of the same activity. I currently have these different activities, and one can just click on the activity, and this is also fairly useful. One can just click on the activity on the watch here. I also do have 2 buttons. This is the Galaxy Watch 4, but I really miss clicking. I had a Polar Watch before, actually in 2000 or when I was 15 I had a Polar Watch, and just the tactile feedback on this is very useful. Also, this has touch, which means that you can navigate on maps, but because I have the small watch, but nonetheless I'm 6 foot tall, if I make like this, then it's already kind of covering a part of the display at least. So I found myself rarely using the touch feature on this watch because, well, it has 5 buttons in total, which I found fairly useful or nice. Then one can also customize the activity, the interfaces or the displays of an activity. Let's take a look at running. Here I'm currently experimenting with a couple of ones. So if we go on running, we can see that there is the running one. This is basically to start the run. Then we also see average pace and the time of day. So these are now all metrics that you can basically use. This is the power one, this is the speed one. And of course now these are all customizable. You can customize how many different things there are shown on here and also what it shows and so on and so forth. This, for example, is stamina, which I also recently began to take a look at. It basically shows you how much energy for the run or for the given workout you still have, and it is called stamina. There is also something called stamina potential, and then it gets complicated real quick. There is also this, because there is the option to add random things, I now added a dashboard which has the core temperature, so one could see that the core temperature here is, well, not existent because I don't have it on my wrist. So much about the watch itself. Of course, now the watch also has the sensor on the back. Maybe I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but I wanted this to be kind of more of an abstract review initially. It also charges with this proprietary charger that Garmin has, and, well, you therefore need a proprietary cable for this. In terms of now the app, let's go back to the app. I have the main interface. If we can, one can click on See All, and then there are, I think, in total 8 or 16 slots or something like this. And then I have kind of the dashboard of my health. Now, of course, this is not including medical data and so on and so forth, but as of my knowledge, there is not really an app that does this all for you. That basically would be something as professional in terms of activity tracking and sleep tracking as Garmin, but at the same time also have all your medical history or something like this in it. Now, there are a couple of services I tried. One of them is Heads Up Health, but well, the development seems to have stagnated largely. Then there is also Samsung Health, but Samsung Health does not have a web interface, and it also does not have many other different things which I would like, which Garmin already has, so I'm taking Garmin, at least as of now. So just in general, I mean, I began to understand much more how my body is kind of able for how well my mind is working. And the more able my body is, the more able my mind is, because to a certain extent I think my body just generates my mind. I'm kind of a program. I'm thinking of myself as the System 2 part, as defined by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, as the System 2 part of me that is slower thinking, that is also maybe more rational, that is kind of just a thing that evolution has developed in order to make additional optimizations that otherwise would not be made by maybe System 1 or something like this. Of course, the question is whether I have free will or I don't have free will, or whether any human in general has free will. And of course, one can ask the question whether a dolphin has free will. And if we take a look at dolphins, then we are like, okay, probably not. They are probably just doing random things that seems to be optimal in terms of the survival. But why would it be then so different compared to us? And, well, many different questions. But the question, or what the watch and also the interface, this dashboard gave me, and also I tried basically to go more into this direction by also getting the Index S2 body composition scale as well as the blood pressure monitor, even though I already had a Omron Evolve, which is also a smart blood pressure monitor, but I wanted to have as much data as I possibly can in Garmin. Now there would be maybe 2 more additions I would actually like to test, which would be, first of all, a heart rate strap. Recently, for example, I was in the changing rooms down and I still had the activity tracking on, and it just showed like zone 5 activity while standing and doing nothing. And I can also feel my pulse. I also can often listen to my pulse because I often have earplugs in, and it was just probably not 175. So of course there is a kind of margin for error on these devices. The same true for maybe sleep tracking. Nonetheless, I take the data I can get at this point in time. And there is actually not really an option that is like 10K that gets you better data. It is just the Garmin watch is probably the best all-in-one device that is not a phone simultaneously, or at least not a smartwatch in the traditional sense simultaneously. So of course now there's the Garmin Watch 8 or the Garmin Fenix 8, which is now actually, so they took the Fenix lineup, and so there was previously another lineup which was called the Epix lineup, and the Fenix and the Epix were always kind of, okay, which one is the best? And now they decided to call all the best watches Fenix and to just make an E version, which is kind of still the Epix version to a certain extent at least. So now I do have a dashboard. I do know how much activity I did yesterday, how much activity I did in the last couple of years at this point already. So I can take a look at my VO2 max estimate, and the VO2 max is an estimate of my cardio score. I, in the last couple of years, had many questions, so many questions, like, what about this one period in which I drove to university and back every single day with the bike, and also had maybe 10 to 15 kilograms in my backpack, and I drove like crazy, at least out of my view. Was I maybe at this point in time cardiovascularly way more fit? I still don't know, because I don't have data from this period. But if I would have my resting heart rate from this period already, then I maybe could compare at least the resting heart rate compared to now. But if I now have a VO2 max estimate, and I do have previous VO2 max estimates, so pre-Garmin, from Samsung, then I can take a look at this and I can say I am as fit as this version of me, that like 2 years ago. At this point where I was like running up the hill and I thought like, oh, I'm so cardiovascularly fit, I can compare myself now. I do have objective metrics that are as objective as they can get, and I can compare these metrics from I can compare the different versions of me that already existed compared to, well, myself as of now. So I can take a look at my body composition, and now more and more I also do have body composition data in Garmin, because you cannot import body composition data into Garmin. You can only basically connect the scale, so you need to use the scale Garmin provides to you. And so now I have body composition data, and I can see, for example, that over the last couple of months, so the last half a year, I basically have a trend that is going downwards. And I can also then correlate these different things, even though, so as of now, there is no such thing that says, okay, if you are 10% body fat, then your VO2 max tends to be 10% higher or something like this. This would be very useful in the future. And probably with basically, so ChatGPT as of currently has the 4 version out, the 4.0 version, and there are also Grok 2, for example, by X or by Elon Musk, or by XAI is now also out. So just to give basically a timestamp to basically the state of artificial intelligence. But Whoop, for example, already has a coach feature that is basically going through all the data, they have similar data compared to Garmin. Maybe not in terms of activity tracking that much, because they don't even have a GPS sensor, which was also one of the main knockouts for me in terms of the Whoop. I mean, the Whoop is nice, but what if I now want to plan my strength training? Garmin at least offers a feature for this, which I might also dive into, but Whoop doesn't. I mean, they now have something like this. It was released like a few months ago, but they are already working with OpenAI, and they basically have now a chat feature in which you can get all the different metrics explained. And so in the last couple of months, for example, I experimented sometimes with exporting data from Garmin, or let it be from Insight Tracker, which is a service that lets you basically upload blood results and then get interpretations from it, which, by the way, also has a Garmin integration. So if those two together would work together better, I would maybe also have my blood markers in here. This would be quite nice. And to then have an artificial intelligence that you can ask about this, which would probably be pretty nice, but is probably something that is already in development, I would at least assume. Now, going through the maybe rest of the dashboard, we have also, these are just the metrics I choose. These are the metrics I choose to be the most important. I also wanted to make them look somewhat symmetrical, as well as on here, but also on the app interface, such that if I take a screenshot at any point of my life through this, of course this might change in the future, but at least for now, let's say I compare myself to the version that was like 2 months ago, then I can see, ideally at least, currently I cannot really see, but ideally what I would have on here is kind of the yearly average in terms of weight, but also in terms of body fat. And what this then would allow me to do is to kind of go through these different timestamps and see what the best version in terms health-wise, basically, at least as approximated by these metrics would be. And I can then answer this question of, am I actually healthier, cardiovascularly speaking, or just overall speaking? And this is also something that's quite useful, I think, and that has not been available to me as of not using Garmin. So there are stats, and in these stats, you basically have the personal records. But because now Garmin allows you to track multiple different things, I now have basically my best steps. In a day, I did 29k steps, at least since getting the Garmin watch. In a week, I have 106k. In a month, I have 405k. My longest goal streak is apparently 9. Now, in terms of running, I now also have my running times in there. And because now this is a kind of a closed ecosystem to a certain extent at least, I now know this. I mean, this is whatever numbers it puts out, I think at least they are somewhat accurate. Not compared to before, where on the Galaxy Watch I also would have these numbers, but then there was also the conversion. I think the Galaxy Watch only recorded back then at least every 5 points a GPS point, whereas the Garmin already had 1. Basically, I'm missing the word, but it would create a GPS data point on a run, for example, for every 1 point, for every 1 meter you would run. And so there was often a problem with the conversion of basically not a data, but an activity that came from Samsung Health into Strava that also would give me a best readout, but I never really trusted these. And so now I do have basically on this watch and the Garmin Fenix 6S Pro, these are my best times. This is how fast my body can run, basically, period, at least as on this system. Now, if I want to improve this, and I did improve 2 values as of today, for example. Today I increased my VO2 max estimate from 58 to 59 by just doing my normal run, because this is also kind of just a continuous measurement device. I don't have to go to a facility to do now a Cooper test or something like this. I also don't have to schedule a Cooper test at my gym just to get a VO2 max estimate update, because it is already implemented in the software. And so if I track my run, I just get a continued VO2 max estimate. That's very useful, I think. Now, there are also these other metrics for the different activities like cycling, swimming, also strength now. So strength was always kind of this thing that was still sport, but since it was easier, I think, to just track cardiovascular sport, strength was just neglected by all of these companies. What I now can do is I do have basically, these are all manually recorded. So there is no GPX track connected to this. So I could just make this up, which also makes it maybe less of a proof for basically performance, or proof of workout, one could also say. But nonetheless, I think this is fairly useful if I just use it for myself. As of current, there are no graphs, so I cannot plot my deadlift. This would be very nice over time, but as of currently, there is no such thing. I already showed you the calendar. I can also now show you the workouts. So basically, for many different activities, not for all, you can additionally create these workouts. Now, a workout is basically different from an activity. The activity is the thing that is running, and then you press on it, and then it says run, and then it doesn't say run, it just tracks your running activity. And then you stop, and then it synchronizes to the phone. What a workout is in addition to the activity, there might be a workout stored in the activity running, and then you might have different workouts. So, for example, you could make a HIIT workout, or an interval workout, in which you run for 1 minute in zone 5, and you can all create this on here. So you can create a workout, you then basically select what kind of workout you want to create, and then you can, create these different workouts. For example, I created a swimming workout, which includes kind of the normal plan I did anyway for the last couple of years. Now I standardized this plan, and I made kind of this plan, and you can see, for example, here now it says 50 meters butterfly, it says 50 meters breaststroke, which is fairly useful. But often, basically before Garmin, I did not have a app in which I could track my workouts, which was also synchronized basically with normal health and activity tracking, or was in the same app at least. I used a workout tracker called Strong. I also used an Excel spreadsheet before. But what I now have is that I basically, in Samsung, I did not have workouts in the same app or system as my activity tracking. So I did have my heart rate for a given strength workout, but I could not record how much weight I actually lifted. Now this is possible, and this is something that I find fairly useful, and nonetheless I am somewhat often very frustrated with this, because many different exercises I would like to track are missing, or other things I would like to have, or I have different ideas about, are also kind of missing. So now I have a workout which is called, let's just take a look at this workout because I couldn't find the other one. So it shows you what muscles, these exercises, you have selected target, and you also then have the secondary muscles. So the primary muscle is red, the secondary is green, and you also have untargeted muscles. So now in this workout, which I call Matrix, because, it has these different machines that are made by this company, I now can go through all of these different exercises, and I also have scheduled rests in between, because if you then are on the watch, what you can do is you can start the workout, and then maybe actually let's show this, because it is, I think, at least to a certain extent, crucial to the usage of this because it's a thing I constantly use. So on here now I have these different workouts. If the workout would be scheduled, it would not show you this, but it would just say, okay, you have this scheduled workout. Do you want to do this workout? So now I have the strength training workout, which I also now can see is apart from my from a couple of muscles, targeting most muscles, and then I can see kind of a preview of this, and I can also start the activity. Then it says row indoor. And then if I rode indoor, so let's just start the activity right now. Ideally, oh no, I was basically not starting the activity, but going into the exercise selection. So let's again start. So right now, and then we go into do the workout, and then we go into strength. And now start the activity. And now if I click on this button here, it basically skips forward. This is also the normal view it then shows you. Let's just move my face out of the picture in order to get this. So now it shows you also how many kilograms I at least have scheduled. There is, at least as of now, no automatic feature. I think they actually with the Watch 8 have made something like this, a kind of a strength coach, but it has not come down to the Fenix 7S Pro until now. Then I can see how many sets are still left. So I have this thing called a group or something like this, which then allows me to, on the phone at least, there are rounds, it is called rounds. So I do have these rounds, which are basically my supersets, and then I can also see in which set of the superset I am. So in this case, 1 out of 3. And then I can press, and then I can also record the repetitions I did, and also at which weight. And if I change the weight, then I go to the next thing, and I then can go in and adjust it up and down, which is the thing I was hoping for. I could for 1.5 years not figure out how to get to this screen. The reason for this is that you only have a certain amount of steps in a workout. And if you don't put them in groups, but if I, let's say, schedule every exercise not in a group, so the group then repeats. So this is basically a group, and then it repeats in this case 3 times because it says 3 rounds. Now, if you don't have a lap button press rest in between, then you cannot go to this screen. And this is something I didn't realize. So you need to have a rest in between, and the lap button rest is the only rest that allows me to basically almost instantaneously. You can also set a certain time, but then you only have the certain time where, so you have the screen that shows you basically how much time you have in order to change the reps, in order to record the reps. So if I now go to the next one, this screen that now occurs is as long as the time duration of the set time duration of the rest. And with the lap button is maybe 4 seconds. I don't know how long this was right now, but if you only set it to 1 second to not have the total workout duration, so there is the total workout duration in which there is a working time. And the working time is basically the total workout duration minus the rest. So I did not want to skew this up, and I also needed all of the different steps because I just had the individual weights, at least in previous workouts. So the only option for tracking repetitions as well as the weight in exercise seems to be to have these lap button presses and then these rounds in there, which also means that because I do drop sets, I have the initial set in the beginning, the second set is lower in terms of the weight and lower again. I need to adjust the weight at least 2 times if I don't make my 1 rep max weight, which is the weight I have in the group in here. So these are basically, I use this at least partially also to track my 1 rep max rep. If I don't hit my 1 rep max for quite some time, then I also might change this. There are 2 different features. You already saw that, so there are 2 different features which are also tracking kind of basically the 1 rep maxes. The first feature is now the personal records, and the personal records I already showed you, which is just the strength activity, and then it shows you only these 5 different lifts. Now, these 5 different lifts are barbell back squat, barbell bench press, barbell deadlift, barbell row, and overhead barbell press. So Garmin for some reason decided that these are the main lifts you need to focus on, or these are at least the filter lifts, one could also say, that should belong onto this page. Now, in addition, Garmin basically allows you to track benchmarks. What is a benchmark? So the benchmark weight now is kind of a way to track additional exercises and their PRs, but mostly it is used for basically scaling other exercises with this benchmark exercise up and down. So it could be the case that if I squat more, that I can also deadlift more. So it would then maybe make sense to connect my deadlift progression with my squat progression. So if I then squat more, and basically I have a tracked activity with a higher squat, and then I have set in a workout that I have scheduled or that I have planned to scale basically my deadlift according to my squat. So I could, for example, say my squat or my deadlift is always 110% of my deadlift weight. If my deadlift weight then increases, the other one increases proportionally. I tried using this, but it resulted in overhead press of 66.9, for example, whereas actually I only my maximum is 60 kilograms, I think, or 62.5. So and I now actually have this value in somewhere in my Garmin data, and I cannot find it, and it says that I overhead press 66.9. So I didn't like these round values. I usually go up in 2.5 kilograms and go down in 2.5 kilograms, usually because I'm on a barbell, and so the smallest unit is 1.25 kilograms. And this is also nicer compared to having 66.9. Also, there is this thing where you cannot input sometimes 0.4 or something like this with weights. So if you have 2 times, I'm not entirely sure where this applied, but I sometimes hit this issue. There are also many different exercises that don't occur in here. There is also the opportunity or the ability to schedule HIIT workouts. Now the HIIT workouts is something, so the HIIT workout itself is something I think that is very useful. I also did not really know, it's like these different there were these different compartments of kind of exercise. One was like strength training, and none of the tracking apps would track anything close to sets and reps. Then the other thing was, okay, normal cardio. And the next thing was HIIT workouts. HIIT workouts were kind of in between. You also needed these exercises, and if you go to the gym, you might sometimes do an assault bike sprint, which is more closer maybe to a barbell press or something like this, because it's like one station and it's also only 1 minute. But you also might have a indoor bike in there, which are also kind of similar. And then to think about this in terms of how you want to track this is, and if the system you are tracking on is then only recording heart rate, then this is kind of unuseful. So in Garmin, you also now have the ability to track HIIT workouts. I use the HIIT workout, basically the HIIT activity, to now create my sprint workouts. I call them sprint workouts because, well, the Garmin benefit I'm targeting is sprint. And so basically I am targeting anaerobic activity, so to speak. Now, we can actually take a look at this if I find it. Now, it kind of sees it also as gym and strength equipment, or strength and gym equipment, or something like this. Now, you also have these rounds, and because it is now, in terms of its structure, closer to a gym workout, it is also, I think it makes sense to also have it like this. But of course, now this is just a Garmin template, and you can also do something like this for the running activity. So basically, Garmin, to a certain extent at least, circled the square and made all of these and bunched all of these into different categories, which I then can access, and I can say, okay, this is probably a HIIT workout. So I can then also see what muscles it targets, and then I have these 3 different rounds. I also have the rest scheduled in between, and this allows me to time my workouts before. Once I start the workout, because I have all of these workouts based on time, so 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and the watch just doesn't stop. I do sometimes have to stop because I have to get the treadmill up to its max speed, and this does take longer, so basically switching from the previous station to the treadmill station takes longer than the 1 minute rest, and then I stop the watch. But as long as the activity runs, I have to run. I basically have to do all these different exercises. And this also makes it possible. So basically I had different previous versions where I had only 30 seconds for a set, and I would do as many reps as I could in these 30 seconds. Recently I deviated from this. Maybe I should go back to this. I am always kind of wondering whether I should go more back to the time-based workout, because the time-based workout is ultimately kind of, time is the ultimate constraint, it seems. The opportunity cost of not using the time I have scheduled for working out is that, well, I have to use more of the rest of my day, which of course also ideally has, so there are basically optimal things to be done at the rest of the day, in the rest of the day, during the rest of the day, and if I take longer in my workout, then I'm just replacing the rest of the day, and with these things I am too slow in the workout to do. So it seems that using time as a constraint, I think is very useful. So I basically in the past scheduled often strength training workouts based on time. 30 seconds for this, 30 seconds for this, and so on and so forth. But of course now there are different constraints, such as what if this is occupied, what if this takes a little bit of time to set up, but then if you don't optimize for time, then you might be standing around or moving the plates slower onto the barbell just because you, well, don't optimize for time. Now, we covered sport, we covered health, we covered sleep, and these are mostly the things I am using it. There are also these other things. There is also a social kind of aspect to the Garmin Connect app. So what you can do in terms of your profile, you can, for example, have your VO2 max displayed on your profile. Now, because I don't have many connections on Garmin, I cannot really make use of this feature as kind of a social pressure thing. What if I had like 15 friends that had a VO2 max of 75, but I don't? So, and also, of course, now these friends would have to decide to put their VO2 max on this, and then I could kind of use it in order to maybe intensify my own training. But currently, this seems to be not really possible. You can select what you want to choose, well, not what you want to choose. You can select what you have basically on your profile for public view. And these, for example, I think are not really available. On the About page, if I scroll basically my connections away, these are kind of the things I have set up. It is basically my age, my current weight, and my current weight, at least to a certain extent, is also, I think, useful. It would be, I think, even more useful if it would allow me to have my body fat displayed. And because now Garmin controls the system, which in this case makes sense, I think, also, so there cannot be in Garmin an activity, I think, that is not recorded on a Garmin watch. There also cannot be a weight measurement that is not recorded on a weight scale. So this means to a certain extent that it is externally validated by Garmin if I have certain values in there. So if I run a certain pace, then as good as the GPS tracking data system and the watch and the heart rate tracking is, this is basically what I'm able to achieve on this. There might be ways to cheat on this, but if I now compare myself against somebody else, then I can, to a certain degree, say, okay, my performance is worse than theirs, usually. So I can also, so basically there are these couple of different things you can display, and there is also this Garmin Fitness Age, which I didn't go already into. So kind of before we stopped, so I now have blood pressure in the app. You can also enter blood pressure manually if you have another monitor. So this is one of the few entries you can do manually. Then there is also HRV. And taking a look at HRV was also kind of one of these things. So recently I drove my HRV to the ground. I also recently experimented a little bit with cocoa and probably ingested too much caffeine. But what I also can see here is, or I could just, if I'm wondering about long-term stress, for example, I can take a look at HRV, and I can see that during my peak during this year, at least my HRV peak, I had a 7-day average of 103, and I never would assume that this was possible. Actually, kind of before, it was a little bit higher even, but when I got the watch, it was usually, and I can now just scroll back on this on my watch, not on my watch, but on my phone. So this was like the state of the art when I just got my watch. And this was like for the whole year, it was like, so this was the highest I think it ever got, or maybe like this. And then, yeah, well, I just 103, and I also had overnight values sometimes of like 185, not in the overnight value average, but it showed that during the last phases of the night, it was like 185. So my heart was still somewhat capable, at least in terms of the measurement of HRV. Now there is also the endurance score, which we already covered. One can now go through this and can see, compared to VO2 max, which is which is not as short term, I can now go through this and can just see, okay, probably in last February or in last April, I was cardiovascularly more fit than I am now. And I can also then maybe say, okay, if I'm cardiovascularly more fit or less fit, how does this impact the rest of my life? How does this impact if I just randomly cycle a little bit here and there, and then I probably right now have more additional stress compared to the higher cardiovascular version of me, so the better performing vascular version of me. Cardiovascular, not just vascular. And well, there are also these other values in there. Summary. I think currently, and I'm thinking this, and this was kind of my initial bet. If I get a Garmin watch, of course I didn't get a Garmin watch just because I randomly wanted to try it. Of course I also wanted to try it, but this also cost something. It actually cost quite a bit, especially the 7S Pro, which I think cost 740 euros, compared to the previous version, which I got refurbished, I think for 330 euros. I bet basically on Garmin being kind of the best system to track my health, at least as of currently. And with health tracking, I don't mean like steps plus my metrics or plus my blood parameters or something like this, but all of the different things, basically the performance side of myself. And So basically the sports side also, but integrating it ideally also with the health side. Now, it seems to be the case as of currently that the connection, or basically if you have both services, Inside Tracker as well as Garmin, that this seems to be kind of the best proximate to health data and also a dashboard of your health. At least I think of it this way. Both might improve in the future. Maybe Garmin buys Inside Tracker and integrates the blood parameters, would be very nice. I think Apple Health already has blood markers in there. In Inside Tracker, there are a couple of values that are imported, like VO2 max is imported, then also sleep data, and then resting heart rate is also imported. Inside Tracker also gives a couple of additional interpretations, which I think is also fairly nice. Because, for example, in terms of resting heart rate, Garmin does not give you a gauge. So basically, it does not give you interpretation. It just says, okay, 48, is that good? Is that bad? I mean, it does give you the fitness age, and the fitness age, we can take a look at the fitness age, gives you now, so my age is 28 and my fitness age is 18. And I can also take a look at when it was not 18, because there is also a graph. Then there are different things that go into this, such as vigorous days. And if you have these vigorous days, and of course you need to continuously meet them, which is, I think, a nice incentive structure, then you have vigorous minutes, resting heart rate, which if I maintain the 46, that seems to be okay, and the body fat at 14.5. I can also then use this and take screenshots of this, which I did in the past, and I can then see, okay, my body fat, at least according to this, I don't know what it is, I think it is the last 4 weeks average or something like this. And then if I have the same fitness age, but with like better body fat, for example, then I again can see, okay, at this point in time I had kind of a better fitness age, even though it was already 18. In Inside Tracker, I can then see a couple of metrics. The first couple of ones are in terms of sleep. Then I have step steady, resting heart rate, and VO2 max. But it also imports my activities and then categorizes them. So Inside Tracker gives recommendations based on blood data for exercise, and also for lifestyle in general, but also for supplements and food. And so if there is an exercise recommendation and it says do strength training this many days, then it basically gets these exercises, and if they are categorized as strength training, then it automatically checks them off. Kind of part of maybe, or an early prototype of what the future of kind of behavioral adaptation in terms of health optimization might look like. So in total, I think I kind of made the right choice retrospectively also. Maybe also going with the Solar version, which I, at least at this point in time, think it is also fairly useful, and I also thought it was fairly useful back then. First of all, I didn't necessarily buy it for the charging, but much more for the capability to measure my light intensity, or my light exposure rather. And I can just take a look at it, and if the last week had an average of, well, not very high, then I can say maybe, okay, maybe I should increase my light exposure. I wanted to show it to you, but this is because the watch is so slow, it is not that slow, but it often is sometimes slow or somewhat slow. And so I often hit in the saving. It's not the best processor, I think. So what I have on my dashboard here is the 7-day average of heart rate is the 46. Then we have the 59 now. And what I wanted to additionally show you is solar intensity. Because I today ran in the dark, because it was still dark, I now have a weekly average of 1.1k lux hours, which is not that high compared to maybe a day in summer in which I ran outside and it was already quite bright.